In the last video, we manually created two channel masks, one for 50% gray and darker and the other for 50% gray and lighter. Now in reality, that's not enough tonal ranges, and those are too large of ranges to be practical for making targeted adjustments. So you have to create a lot more masks, probably around 20 masks. And to do that manually would be extremely tedious, and nobody does that. So what do we do to get all these masks? Well, we use Photoshop Actions. What Photoshop Actions are, it's a script that runs inside of Photoshop that mimics what you would do on the keyboard and creates those masks for you in a matter of seconds. Now, where do you get them? The internet is loaded with them. If you just Google Luminosity Photoshop Actions, you'll get a whole bunch of them. And the one we're going to use today is from a guy called Greg Benz. And if you look in the PDF of this presentation on the resources page at the start, we do have a link to Greg Benz's website. And these are free. And Greg Benz is a creator of another program called Luminosity, which we'll talk about later. So I've already installed his actions, and if I go up to Windows Extensions in Luminosity Masks, you can see it installed it right here. But before we proceed, I'm going to take channels out, and I'm going to move it over here so we can more easily see what's happening when we create the masks. There are three buttons here, one to create the mask, one to clean up. We'll talk about that in a second. And his website also has a bunch of tutorials on using luminosity masks, which is really good to check out because it applies however you create the masks. So what we're going to do on this skyline is we're going to go ahead and create mask, and you can see it running. And it's been created, and now look at all the masks that have been created now. These lights 1 through 5 are all for highlights. These are for the darker tones, the midtones, light midtones, and dark midtones. And so you have much more control over the parts of the photo that you target. You can see the differences in what's being targeted. So the lesson here, the takeaway here, is to really use luminosity masks. You need to find yourself some Photoshop actions to create you a set of masks. Now that we've created all these luminosity masks, let's look at something it can do for us. Luminosity masks are famous for subtle adjustments to your photos. So let's click back to our photo. You can click on the RGB channel here. You'll see this red overlay. That means that your mask is still selected, so just click on it to get back to the photo. What I want to do is enrich the colors that are in the sky, but not too much. I don't want to make them look unrealistic, and I like using vibrance for that. But also at the same time, I'm going to need the colors in the water that reflects the sky to also be enriched. So what I'm going to pick here for a mask is my light midtones. Okay, and what we're going to do then is go down to our selection that says load this channel as a selection, and you're going to get this error message: warning, no pixels are more than 50% selected, the edges will not be visible. All that means is there's less than a 50% selection and the marching ants cannot be displayed. That's not a problem. Just hit OK, and let's go up to our vibrance adjustment and hit it. You can see it created a mask. Again, here's that overlay. Just click on your mask. So what I'm going to do, you could use saturation, but I think saturation is kind of heavy-handed and saturates all colors equally. Vibrance is a little intelligence built in. So let me take that over, and probably more than I would do in real life, but I want you to be able to see it on the screen. I'm going to take it way over to 90 here. Okay, so look what we did. Let me take this off. We've enriched the sky. We've enriched the colors that's reflected in the water using that mask. Now, if we didn't have the mask, let me turn the mask off, you can see how cartoony that is. But with the mask on, that is targeting just the light midtones, we make a nice subtle adjustment to the sky and water, and we really don't affect the rest of the photos, like the darker tones in here. So that's what luminosity masks are famous for. However, creating all these masks, we do pay a price. If you look down here, you can see our original photo was 126 megabytes, and after we created all the masks, it's now 939 megabytes. So what we typically do is use the masks that we need, and after we're done, we delete those masks because we don't need them anymore. And what Greg Benz did in his free actions here is provide us a cleanup button. So let's say we're done with this photo. We hit cleanup, and the masks have been deleted, and now the difference is from 126 megabytes to 168 megabytes. And of course, we can, if we need to come back into this photo, we want to use the masks again, we can recreate them at any time. So far I've been showing you the luminosity mask being used with Photoshop adjustment layers. But it's not just limited to the adjustment layers. We can use our third-party filter tools such as Nik. So let's say I wanted to come back to this photo. I liked what I did to the sky here, but I think the photo's kind of cool and needs to be warmed up a bit. Well, Nik has a great filter called Brilliance and Warmth. So I want to use that. But if I went to my filter menu and looked here, you'll see that the Nik collection is grayed out. Nik doesn't recognize this Photoshop adjustment layer as an image. So if you remember our previous videos, we're going to have to create an intermediate image for Nik to grab. So if you use Shift Control Alt E on the PC or Shift Command Option E on the Mac, we'll get a layer with this adjustment already baked in. Now we'll be able to delete that layer later, but let's go ahead to our Nik tools and bring up Color Effects Pro, which is where the Brilliance and Warmth filter is. So it loaded it in, and this is the Brilliance and Warmth filter, and it has several presets. This is how the photo, this is neutral without anything being applied. And what I want to do is warm up the photo. But as you can see, it warms up the entire photo, all tonal ranges. That's not what I want. I like some of the warmth there, but not everywhere in the photo. So let's just go ahead and say OK. And it'll load that back into Photoshop. Okay, and then so I have this except with this over-the-top warmth. Like I said, we can come back at any time and create our masks again. So if we go up to our luminosity panel and say create masks, and it will go through looking at our image, creating all our masks, say OK. What I'd like to do here is add the warmth to the midtones. I'm going to pick the Midtones 2 mask. You can see the mask here. If we go down again to load the channel as a selection, we'll see where it plans to mask out things through a selection. And if you go down to the layers panel and you see add a layer mask, you click on that and it's automatically going to use these selections to create a mask. Let's look at the mask here. So that's the same as our channel mask. Now let's look at the results. There we go, a slight warmth. You can see that the buildings are warm, some of the areas in the clouds are warmed, and the water down here. So also don't forget that if you think it's a little too much, you can always use the opacity slider on a layer to adjust it down a little bit. Let's say about there. There we go. So I think it's a much more attractive photo. So if we show you where we started. Oh yeah, by the way, I told you we could delete this layer. We don't need this layer anymore. So this is where we started. Use the mask to vibrance on the sky and the water, and then used another mask to create a warmth in the picture.